When his daughter disappears, a desperate father turns to a psychic for answers.
She's passed.
The psychic tells him she's already dead.
My mind just didn't want to accept it.
But detectives are skeptical.
As a detective, I have to look at hard, plain facts.
But as her visions begin to ring true, they bring a warning.
How's she in trouble?
I really feel panic.
Same guy that killed Stacy is gonna kill again.
Can the psychic lead police to a killer before it's too late? July 22nd, 1992. In Tempe, Arizona, a suburb of Phoenix. College student Stacy Hendrickson disappears from her apartment without a trace. She was just 21. For her father back home in Ohio, it's the worst thing he can imagine.
I never ever thought I'd have to face this kind of thing in my life. My mind just didn't want to accept it. And then finally when it hit me, I just, like I say, my knees buckled and I just fell in the chair.
In Arizona, Stacy was going to college, away from home for the first time. A compassionate, caring young woman, Stacy was training to help children with diabetes, a condition she herself suffered from. If she's still alive, her disease may be her worst enemy.
There's a time element involved, and it's very serious. She's probably got approximately 48 hours before she'd go into insulin coma.
Tempe, Arizona detective Alan Reed is placed in charge of the investigation. He begins at her apartment, where she was last seen.
We knew that Stacy was missing and that she was diabetic, and I found inside the refrigerator her insulin, which she needed to take. And we thought that she would have taken that with her if she had gone voluntarily with someone. But it was obvious that there had been some type of force used, as we had two forced open doors.
Stacy's roommate, Virginia, was at her mother's the night Stacy disappeared. She provides a list of friends for police to talk to. Reed hopes one of them will know where Stacy is. But back in Ohio, 2,000 miles from the investigation, Stacy's father can't just sit back and wait. A neighbor convinces him to talk to a psychic.
Hi, I'm Raleigh.
Hi, Neil. I felt some desperation in his voice that kind of made me realize that whether he was skeptical or not, he was at wit's end.
Gail St. John claims she can see and feel things that most of us cannot. Her gift has helped to find other missing children. Maybe she could find Stacy.
When I started looking at Stacy's picture, and I was just kind of, just picking up vibrations between looking at the picture and feeling Raleigh, and just kind of, and all of a sudden, just, it was so fast, Stacy was next to me. And I kind of took Raleigh's hand and said to him, I have to tell you something. Stacy's gone.
And I just, kind of a lump in my throat. And she starts describing an area.
I'm seeing this building that's
saying that there's a
made of corrugated
small building, about probably 12 by 14.
But this building was like a corrugated metal, which struck me as really odd, because it really couldn't, and then a fence around it, which I kept looking, thinking, what? This doesn't make sense. This isn't like I would picture a building myself. And seeing the large equipment, it moved dirt, and that's not something you see sitting everywhere.
I asked her, I says, when she was describing this building, I says, is she in this building? She goes, no. She says she's very close by. And she said there's water real close by.
What does it all mean? Could Stacy be showing Gail where to find her body?
Then I looked down, straight down, and the dirt was cracked. And I had never seen anything like this before. And I was trying to, describe all the things that I saw where she was. And I'm trying to walk like a trail.
She was like in her own little world, but If she wasn't in no trance, she just
Feel that?
basically was walking around the room just talking. I started thinking that she's actually right there.
But Gail St. John is picking up more than just visions.
Along with voice and showing me pictures, though, she was impressing with feelings of things that, you know, happened. And it first started out with the burning, hot burning sensation I felt in the back of my head. And from there, I could feel something with the wrist, and I felt pain. It was almost a like rope or something around the wrist, and like it really felt that hot burning when it went into me. I actually saw everything just go black around me.
Gail believes Stacy was murdered, bound and shot in the back of the head.
But there's a lot of things you try not to go into as far as those details.
Whether she was real, it was an act, whether having the skepticism that I had, you know, and being 2,000 miles away or 1,800 miles away, I just didn't know. I couldn't say it was for real or it wasn't at that point in time. Later on, that's a different story, but right then,
Back in Tempe, Arizona, Detective Reed's investigation continues. He has few leads, but forensics have unearthed one important clue. Whoever forced their way into Stacy's apartment left fingerprints behind. Maybe someone in Stacy's apartment complex saw something.
Have you heard anything unusual in the last several hours?
no.
Reed gets lucky. Stacy's neighbor across the hall witnessed the break-in.
Police Department?
Pushing on the door and banging on the door.
Who was this mysterious intruder? Did he kill Stacy as the psychic believes? The disappearance of a 21-year-old college student in Tempe, Arizona sends a desperate father to a psychic. But what she sees, he doesn't want to hear. She tells him his daughter is already dead, but police believe Stacy Hendrickson has been abducted and could still be alive. Now they've found a witness who could lead them to Stacy.
He hears the sound of steps coming up to this second-floor apartment. And as he is awake, he hears some pounding on the door. So he looks through the peephole and he sees this young white male, approximately 25 years old, banging on the door.
Banging on it and there's no answer or anything, so finally
He tries forcing open the door with his shoulder, with his hands, and then does a little drop kick and then makes entry. What concerned me is the neighbor doesn't call the police. Told me that it was his opinion that this was a boyfriend-girlfriend dispute. He didn't want to get involved. He told me that he went back to bed and heard nothing further. So he really had no other information that was helpful, other than he told me that the person that entered was a white male, clean-cut looking, and was wearing a very distinctive black T-shirt. And he said that this black shirt had on it a skull.
In Ohio, Roland is desperate to find out anything about his daughter, so he calls Detective Reed and tells him about Gail St. John and her strange visions. At first, his request falls upon deaf ears.
Yeah, I considered psychics and stuff that they did, the word I use is mumbo-jumbo.
So all I could do at that point was listen close and pass on what she had told me to the detective that was actually there in Arizona, and see if he recognized anything I was talking about.
As a cop, I have to look at hard, plain facts. And so, as a courtesy, and it was a courtesy to Raleigh, we contacted Gail St. John.
Would this be the phone call that would change the course of Detective Reed's investigation?
I was so busy, and I was so not wanting to waste my time. I gave Gail's number to a partner that was working this case with me. I asked him to call.
I kind of felt the skepticism, but there was a bit of willingness to listen.
I've got something to write with. Chain.
Gail tells Reed's partner where they'll find Stacy's body. She describes palm trees to the south, a chain-link fence, cracked dirt, a small corrugated shed with a slanted roof, And then she tells the detective something she hasn't told Roland. Gail believes Stacy was murdered, shot in the back of the head.
When I first told him that you're dealing with a murder rather than an abduction, he was kind of hesitant to the point of almost kind of saying, no way.
But Detective Reed is not about to turn his missing persons investigation into a homicide based on the word of someone who claims to talk to dead people.
The information she had given to us was useless. It didn't lead us anywhere. We couldn't put that information out on a police radio or even begin to look anywhere. And at this point, we don't even have a body. We don't even have a victim.
You know, there is really no convincing someone that you're right or you're wrong. You have to let things fall into place. If I tell you something and then later it happens, then it fell into place, now you understand, you believe.
2 days later, after the call, something does happen. Something that will change Reed's skepticism forever. A city worker finds a body in a dumpster next to the Tempe Canal.
This was just another routine, if you will, death call for me. But as I drove down that canal road, I start to remember, all right, now, Gail said it was near water. Well, the canal's full of water. I get out of my police car and I see palm trees to the south. I look down and I'm walking on cracked earth. And oh my gosh, I see a rolling machine, which is a conveyor belt. And this machine specifically removes debris from the canal as it floats down and places that debris into a dumpster. The hair on the back of my neck was just standing straight up because everything that Gail had told the police, it was like a picture. It couldn't be a better match.
When police remove the body, it's so badly decomposed from the hot sun and water that a photo ID is impossible.
However, I want you to know that even though I could not make a positive ID of her at that point, based on what Gail said, in my heart, I knew that this was Stacy Hendrickson.
One other clue convinces Reed the body is Stacy's, something Gail St. John said.
And as I picked Stacy's body up, I could see that she had ligature marks on her wrist and that she had been bound. And she was x-rayed, and it was apparent from the x-ray that she had been shot in the head. And at that point, I became somewhat of a convert to the information and the gift or the ability that Gail St. John had.
A hard-boiled detective is now a believer, and with a killer on the loose, he wonders what else Gail St. John knows. Can the psychic really help the cop find Stacy's killer?
I can't tell you how astounded I am. I do have a killer out there, and the information you gave us was accurate.
I think he, at that point, dropped his skepticism and was more open to saying, okay, now I see what you said was right. Where do we go from here?
The next day, Stacy's father flies to Arizona to help ID the body of his daughter. He has yet to see how accurate Gail was.
I was hoping it wasn't Stacy. That's what my guts was saying.
Still waiting for dental records to make a positive ID, Detective Reed shows Roland 3 earrings that he recovered from the body.
I had bought her 3 diamond studs, and they graduated from small to a medium to a little bit bigger. And she was minus an ear on the one side, but this ear had these 3 diamonds in it. And that was a very identifying thing to me, because it had only been a couple months that I'd bought those and she wore them. So yeah, I felt that at that point that was definitely Stacy.
Detective Reed takes Roland to the bleak spot where his daughter was found.
When we got there, he was amazed. He was amazed at what he saw. It were really exactly as Gail had said.
What really gets to me, I think, is I always told my daughter, if you ever are in a problem and you're in need of help, you call Dad, and Dad will be there to take care of it. And I drill on that constantly. To have to come and find your daughter or your son in a situation like this where they wind up basically, you know, dumped in a dumpster like garbage, it's pretty hard to take. It just...
Once we had recovered Stacy's body, I can't begin to describe the pressure then that begins.
Just as Gail St. John predicted, Detective Reed has a homicide on his hands. Reed now follows up on dozens of leads, but none lead to a suspect. The psychic was right about where Stacy's body would be found and the terrible way in which she died. Can she now lead police to her killer?
I saw people divided up into two camps. I had people who said, this is a bunch of baloney. You know, a lady who claims to be psychic or who talks to the dead, that's a bunch of baloney. I had other people in the police department say, Al, you need to listen to this lady. And they would relate personal experiences to me that they have had. So I was encouraged by probably half to pursue this avenue with Gail, and the other half were laughing at me. And there were some people also that said, hey, you maybe need to look at her as a suspect. And I guess if you are someone that give police information about a crime, you know, a lot of times that person giving the information is responsible. Detective Reed.
Days after discovering the body, Reed gets a disturbing call from Gail.
I really feel panic. I feel panic.
She says the killer is about to strike again.
The same guy that killed Stacy is going to kill again. Who's he going to kill?
Gail believes his next victim will be Stacy's roommate, the girl who was staying with her mother the night Stacy disappeared.
Very upset.
In Tempe, Arizona, a missing persons case has become a full-scale homicide investigation. Eerily, psychic Gail St. John predicted that 21-year-old Stacy Hendrickson had been murdered days before police found her body. Now Gail is warning police that the killer is about to kill again. She says that Stacy's spirit has told her that the next victim will be her roommate, Virginia.
The same guy that killed Stacy is going to kill again. Who's he going to kill? Virginia. I mean, she's real specific.
She's talking about the roommate. I'm feeling terrible panic now. Stacy's just going wild here, trying to describe what's happening and what's going to happen, and the roommate's life is in danger. She's going to go see this guy, and she's just going so fast. I'm trying to absorb it, and, you know, of course, the detectives are you still there? Well, yeah, but I'm trying to listen to your conversation and hers. And sometimes you feel like you're halfway between two worlds.
I'm not sure of it. I'm not sure of what's going to happen. She's actually telling me that the same person who killed Stacy Hendrickson is going to kill again, and the person is going to be Stacy's roommate. That's pretty specific. And part of me goes, you know, this is pretty outlandish. The other part of me says, you know what? I can't disregard it. Look what happened when we went to the scene and found all those things she said.
Reed heeds Gail's warning and asks Virginia, Stacy's roommate, to come down to the station. Gail has also told him that Virginia knows the killer and is reluctant to make him a suspect.
About an hour ago, I tell her that Stacy's father had contacted a lady who has a gift. And this lady we have found to be very accurate. And I then tell her the story of how we found Stacy's body. And as I'm talking to Virginia, I'm placing the Polaroids in front of her. And I can tell that she's somewhat disturbed at what I'm saying. And then I look at her in the eyes, and I said, I just got a call from Gail St. John. And she says that the same person who took the life of your friend is going to kill you tonight. And when I said those words, The blood drained out of her face. She turned white, and she teared up. And I'll never forget, she immediately said to me, "Check out John, check out John."
John Adams is a 26-year-old manager of a local fast food restaurant. Adams met both Stacy and her roommate just a few weeks before Stacy was killed. Incredibly, Virginia has a date with him that very night. With no time to lose, Reed tracks down Adams at his workplace. If Gail is right, this man's prints should match the set left on Stacy's door.
He was very cordial, and he was very cooperative. He told me that he knew Stacy. He told me that he was dating Virginia. I saw no sign of emotion from him. I asked him if he could assist me in the investigation by allowing me to take his photograph and also to take a sample of his fingerprints. When I left that restaurant, I was really not confident that that was my killer. He was just way too cool, calm, and collected. My faith was going to be put in those fingerprints. Have a good one now.
The prints turn out to be a perfect match, but that's not enough to charge Adams. There's no murder weapon, and nothing as yet that links him to the shooting.
And Gail St. John she's done her job, and it's now my job to build a factual case of things that people understand in court that I can use to put him away.
Reed's hard work finally pays off. Adams does own a skull t-shirt that matches the one the neighbor saw the man banging on Stacy's door wearing. Not only that, but it turns out that Adams had recently bought a gun, the same caliber as the murder weapon. Armed with the new evidence, Reed pulls Adams in for questioning. Once again, Gail St. John's eerie predictions are confirmed.
So everything is now just adding up. Everything points to John Adams. And I need to convince him to make this right, to tell the truth. We began the interview and talking about, really, John. In the back of my mind is a warning that I received from Gail St. John. And she has told me I need to be very careful with him. John is full of rage and anger, but she tells me that he can change from this nice, courteous young man to a raging bull. And I need you to know that John will try to hurt me. And at a certain point in the interview, I could tell that John was ready to talk. John began to weep, and he did tell me at that point that he did kill Stacy Hendrickson. He did what?
I killed Stacy.
And I told him that this was a murder and that I would have to charge him with a murder. And I did use that emotional word. What happened, I'll never forget. From this very sorrowful, repentant young man who has his head down, his shoulders slumped, his hands clasped, tears streaming down his face, changes in the twinkling of an eye and becomes this raging bull and attacks me. Again, what Gail St. John had said was true. This man attacked me.
John Adams is charged with the murder of Stacy Hendrickson, and he eventually makes a full confession. In court, the final terrible moments of Stacy's last night alive were revealed. On July 22nd at 2 a.m., Adams arrived at Stacy's apartment, fueled on drugs and alcohol. He banged on the door, kicked it in, and chased Stacy into the bedroom. There, he shot her in the back of the head, her pillow muffling the sound of the bullet and the bedsheets catching the spray of blood. Adams then wrapped her body in the blood-stained sheets and dumped the evidence in the Tempe Canal. Days later, it was siphoned from the water and deposited in a dumpster, the exact location described by Gail St. John.
I went on to work homicide almost 10 years, and in those 10 years, I never, ever dealt again with someone like Gail St. John.
Stacy saved her roommate's life. That's what it boils down to. If she hadn't said it to me, if she hadn't got that across to me, then we would have had another murder.
In court, Adams pleads guilty to manslaughter and is sentenced to 29 years in jail.
I feel you'd have to be a little crazy to do something like that, but I don't know how they feel. What promotes them thoughts to do things like that to some innocent person? After all, she was in her room bed, sleeping. She wasn't bothering anybody. You know, why?
In Portland, Maine, a beautiful young woman vanishes one night while out on the town.
We have no crime scene. We have no body.
Is she alive or dead?
It was unusual that a young lady goes missing from a nightclub downtown Portland and is never seen again.
Desperate, the top detective turns to a psychic for help.
And immediately, when he started talking, she was right there.
I can hear now.
Can the psychic's mysterious visions help police to find Amy?
Help them find me, help them find me, help them get me out.
Portland, Maine, a peaceful city in historic New England. But on October 21st, 2001, that peace was shattered. Amy St. Laurent, a 25-year-old administrative assistant and Portland native, disappears into the night. Amy was charming, fun-loving, and according to everyone, reliable.
Amy's a responsible young woman who didn't turn up for work on Monday. Not prone to disappearing and not getting her cat fed and leaving her personal belongings behind.
I miss her. I want her back. Anything anyone can do to help would be really appreciated.
It wasn't just her family who were desperate to find Amy. The entire city was looking for her.
Portland is a small city. Everybody was aware of it. Amy's picture was everywhere. You couldn't walk a block without seeing her photograph.
Deputy Chief Joe Laughlin of the Portland Police is in charge of a team of detectives working the case.
It was unusual that a young lady goes missing from a nightclub downtown Portland and is never seen again. I mean, she just basically disappears. And there are no answers. The public's demanding answers.
And one of our best reporters went downtown, and the family was hanging up posters with her picture, and they were visibly distraught. And I think everybody just couldn't believe what was going on, and their hearts just went out to the family.
What police know is that at the Pavilion nightclub, Amy became separated from her friend around midnight. Though he searches, he can't find her in the crowded club. Frustrated, he leaves. After that, she vanishes.
Portland police continue their search for Amy St. Laurent, the 25-year-old administrative...
Lieutenant Laughlin is feeling the heat. He has to find Amy, but has few leads.
And police are asking anyone with information to come forward.
We had zip. We had nothing. We had some speculation, conjecture. We have no crime scene. We have no body. We have no physical evidence.
5 days after Amy disappeared, driving into police headquarters, Laughlin tunes in a voice on his car radio.
Q97.9, this is Vicki Monroe with Spirit Messenger.
It is a moment that will change the course of the investigation.
Hi, Vicki. My name's Jackie.
Hi, Jackie. Jackie, has your mother and father passed?
Yes, both my parents are...
At radio station Q97.9 in downtown Portland, psychic Vicki Monroe is hosting her weekly call-in show. She's helping listeners connect, so she says, with their dead loved ones.
I see them very clearly defined. I hear them, and I also get a sensation of whatever they're feeling or how they might have passed. Your parents are both fine, alive and well, as they put it on the other side. Your mother says, though, that you were there when she passed?
Actually, I was.
And were you holding her hand?
I was.
And did you tell her it was okay to go?
I did.
Okay.
So I was listening to the radio. I said, you know what? I'm going to call this woman when I get to work and see if she can tell me where Amy is.
Can a psychic radio show host really help a cop find a missing woman?
Why not? Why not? My frame of mind is perhaps this can trigger some thought process in me, some further inquiry to the detectives, some information that we may not have thought about. Joe Laughlin, I'm a lieutenant at the Portland Police Department. I'm wondering if perhaps you can help me with something. Have you heard of the Amy St. Laurent case?
Lieutenant Laughlin's phone call triggers an extraordinary reaction.
I was shaking. I know that I started to cry.
I was last seen at one of the nightclubs called the Pavilion.
But I was just so stunned, shocked, and really surprised because he's telling me about this missing person who then just starts to appear right in front of my face. There is a person coming in, and she came right through for me.
Immediately, Vicky gets a powerful image of Amy.
She's exclaiming that her name is Amy, gray sweatshirt, writing on the side. I kept asking her, what does that say? And she said, Pratt Whitney. And that was where she worked at the time. Okay.
For the psychic, it can mean only one thing.
My first response was that sick feeling in my stomach always usually happens when I know somebody's passed away. So immediately there was a feeling of, or a sense of, this girl's passed.
Monroe tells Laughlin Amy is dead. And then she goes a step farther.
I knew this is a murder case.
And he's really not prepared for what she tells him next.
Okay, she keeps repeating, Amy's repeating J. It was definitely the name of the man that killed me.
In Portland, Maine, 25-year-old Amy St. Laurent has been missing for 5 days. Is she alive? Has she been abducted? Where is she? The police are stumped. Desperate for clues, Lieutenant Joe Laughlin asks Vicky Monroe, a local radio personality and psychic, for help. Monroe has a terrifying vision of Amy. She's dead, the victim of a brutal murder, and something more.
I saw Amy. She described the gentleman.
His name is Jeff.
It was definitely the name of the man that killed me.
Jeff. That's what Amy's saying.
And he killed her.
She got into a vehicle with...
New evidence has revealed that the last person to see Amy was a man by the name of Jeff Gorman. No one but the police has that information.
I mean, it was uncanny. It was uncanny information, no doubt. It starts a conversation, it starts a dialogue, it starts rethinking, it starts discussion and argument, which is good for the case, because that's what we constantly do. Most cases start with a crime scene and some place to start. Here, we are trying to find a starting place. And ultimately, we found that starting place with Jeffrey Russell Gorman.
While Lieutenant Laughlin heads up the investigation, 2 veteran detectives lead the search for Amy. Scott Heracles from Maine State Police and Danny Young from Portland PD.
Gorman was just the last person known to be with Amy St. Laurent. And at that point, we had to focus on him until we could either clear him or put the case together.
Gorman is hauled in. As he is questioned, Laughlin watches for signs of deception. If the psychic is right, this man knows what happened to Amy.
This guy, then Eric, is he around? I don't know. She said that he left her.
Gorman, who wanted to appear very cooperative, was in fact very reluctant. He would come and give you his story, but he wouldn't do anything further.
I play a lot of pool.
Under close questioning by Detective Young, Gorman freely admits meeting Amy at the Pavilion nightclub and taking her to a party at his friend's apartment.
All the time. It's just play a bunch of people. We just go back over and drink. Okay.
There were 3 people, herself included. They got in the car.
I think that she left with Jeffrey Gorman. Number 1, she couldn't find her friend at the time. 2, Gorman knows a lot of people in a position of authority, and bouncers and bar persons and things of that nature, so she might have felt that ephemeral safety with him.
According to Gorman, Amy doesn't stay long at the party and he drives her back downtown.
I pulled up. I did not even put my car in park. Left it in draw. She says, I hope you remember my name. I'll call you tomorrow. All right.
But Gorman's story doesn't stack up.
Across the street from the Pavilion is a jewelry store. So they had a video camera that basically shot out through the glass into the road. We knew what Gorman had for a car, so we looked at the tapes for that time period, and Gorman's car never appeared. So that clearly indicates to us that he's lying.
At the time, he also says that there's a lot of activity here, that bouncers and persons are coming and going from the nightclub. We know that at that time of night that this place is a ghost town.
Police dig into Gorman's background. They find a criminal history that stretches all the way to Florida.
His record included a lot of misdemeanor crimes and thefts and crimes with dishonesty. Knowing his background, going into Florida and Alabama and talking to the individual detectives and people down there, and we got the picture of Russ Gorman, Jeffrey Gorman, as someone we didn't trust, and nothing that he said, nothing that he said we could verify. Yeah, they did. Before leaving, after leaving the pavilion.
Gorman's suspicious behavior after the interview raises other red flags.
He has a piece of crap car that he never cleans, that he's driving around in, that his friend said a couple of days earlier, why don't you clean this thing up? And he says, oh, it's a piece of junk. There's no sense cleaning this car up. And the day after Amy was missing, that car was cleaned up, and it was immaculate. He starts changing his appearance. He shaves his head. He gets body piercings and tattoos. He's making all sorts of inquiries about polygraph and dealing with the police. He refuses to cooperate with us. He was indicating all sorts of what we call post-offense behavior, and we start building a case, starting with the fact that he never dropped her off.
So we've lost a little bit of time in there. I don't know where he went, what he was doing.
Jeff Gorman is now suspect #1 in the disappearance of Amy St. Laurent, just as psychic Vicki Monroe predicted.
I don't know if he was back.
It was definitely Jeff. That is the name they had to go with. Okay, and I see it, yes, I see it.
But the psychic has even more powerful visions. Amy is showing Vicki where they can find her.
Then she shows me this area. It was wooded, very, very wooded.
I can hear water.
There's water. I could hear water. She also described that there was a house nearby that was significant to this Jeff person.
I am very near his home.
Police know Jeff Gorman often stays at his mother's house, located outside Portland in a heavily wooded area. New evidence shows he was close by the night Amy disappeared. He was stopped by police for a broken headlight at 2:45 in the morning.
He could only possibly travel in a small radius based on all the information that we had gathered.
This isn't too far from where he was stopped.
We established criteria for search areas. One of the areas is right near Gorman's mother's house, where he lived. We believe that Amy could be somewhere in that area.
Could this area be the dense woodland Monroe sees in her visions? It's 6 weeks since Amy vanished.
There was a huge amount of pressure on the police to solve this crime. First, because we didn't know if this would happen again to another young woman in the Old Port. And also just for her family to know that there was some resolution.
But at that time, it was just Gorman and Cush. This is at the...
The detectives became very attached to her. And in fact, at one point, because of who she was, they were referring to her as our Amy.
Amy was too sweet a girl. She was too good a person. So many of our cases, we're able to reason some of these things away. We still work very hard, but you can reason a lot away so you don't have to take a lot home with you that night. But Amy never left. She came home every night.
Lieutenant Lachlan actually asked me if I would speak to a woman named Diane Jenkins. Well, the names didn't match, so I honestly didn't know who that would be. And it ended up being Amy's mom. Diane came with me and she had a bag with her. And it contained a book and pictures. It was definitely confirmation for me that was Amy. That was the girl that I had seen. Mrs. Jenkins, what I do is I see people that have passed away, and I can see Amy, and she's right behind you. The vividness of Amy was very intense, and this time was going to show herself in complete form, right down to her tattoo and her sandals, so her mother would know, this is me. Don't even question this. This is me.
She's wearing a gray.
It was very important that I relay the message to her mother that I love you, you were a wonderful mother, you were all of these great things to me. I felt sad, but I also felt great relief in the respect that her mother knows at least this much, that she's okay and she's not suffering.
But now detectives face another obstacle, Mother Nature.
We had conducted many, many searches, and this was our last big effort.
Police need to work fast. It's early December, and heavy snowfall is in the forecast.
As we started the search in the morning, you know, we were all very anxious to get moving because snow was coming. Snow was imminent. It was going to happen that day.
The snow may have prevented the cadaver dogs from actually indicating on the grave, which then would have been another 4 or 5 months.
Urgency really sums up how we were feeling. We had to find her.
Danny and Scott really believed that we were going to find her. I was just like, man, I don't know how we're going to do it. You know, it's just the proverbial needle in a haystack.
Just as Monroe predicted, police now believe the answer to the mystery of Amy's disappearance lies buried in these woods.
This is very, very familiar territory to Jeffrey Russ Gorman. His mother's house is through the woods here, probably about 4/10 of a mile. These trails he's been through many, many, many times. He's fished these ponds. If you look over here, you can see probably 50 feet from us is water.
For hours, police scour the woods. And then,
around 2:30 in the afternoon, the search team was walking through this area, and they stepped on an area over here where the earth was soft and determined that it didn't feel right. They backed up and they looked, and they noticed some depression, soft earth, fresh shovel marks.
Could this be what they were looking for?
The dogs first come through here, and they go immediately to this pine tree here, and they alert on the pine tree. From here, they go to this area where there was a grave.
Detective Young takes charge of the crime scene.
I'd taken some tools from my vehicle and dug down a little bit and searched, and I could feel basically an arm, or I could feel skin underneath.
The forensic dig continues late into the night. But is it Amy's body they have found? Has the psychic been right all along?
You need to help me get out. Help them find me, help them find me, help them get me out.
It's December 8th, 2001. For the past 6 weeks, finding Amy St. Laurent has consumed the police in Portland, Maine.
Amy is the type of daughter you'd be proud to have. And I had a daughter, Amy, the same age. It hit home, hit very, very close to home.
Amy is the kind of victim, she's the kind of person we're supposed to protect. She's the reason we come to work. Then we had to get it done for her.
Now they may be close. Psychic Vicki Monroe described where to look for her body.
I see a house, there's a house, there's a house, there's water. I could hear water.
It's Jeff.
She also told police the name of the person responsible.
The gentleman that did this to her was Jeff.
Jeff Gorman is the chief suspect in the investigation, but the psychic knows even more.
And then Amy told me that I'm under something. I can't get out.
What does she mean? Police are about to find out.
When we're doing the forensic exhumation, I do remember finding the piece of plywood, and what Vicki had told me resonated at that point, that she was under something.
And when the plywood is removed, a gray Pratt & Whitney sweatshirt, as seen in Monroe's vision, emerges from the damp, dark soil.
At that point, we knew that we had Amy.
From the moment we confirmed, it was very surreal. We were on autopilot immediately. I don't think we needed to sleep again for a couple of days. It was invigorating and a little bit of relief.
It's an emotional moment, a relief, and yet it confirms everyone's worst fear.
I think probably the most difficult part of this case is the day we discovered Amy and finding her remains and going through the forensic dig and exhumation. You know, you have this image of a young lady who had her whole life ahead of her, and, you know, seeing that crime scene was very difficult for all of us.
In the moments that we found her, we got our first snowstorm of the season.
We were leaving the site when the snow started coming down, and it was a substantial storm, too.
We all were just amazed that if it was another day, we never would have found her. And Vicki Monroe had told me that she would be found before the first snow.
And I could see it on television, where they had found Amy and what she was wearing. I do this for a living. This shouldn't be a shock. I thought, oh my God.
How could Vicki Monroe have known so much about this terrible case? Did the spirit of Amy really tell her? Vicki said Amy had been murdered. She said the killer was named Jeff. She predicted he buried Amy under something near water close to a familiar house. She even knew about the gray sweatshirt. I don't know how she could possibly have known any of this information.
I don't know if it's just something that I carried with me since I was born. Some people will say I'm cursed, and I say no. This isn't a curse. I feel blessed.
I can't explain it. I think human beings have sixth senses, or I know that I watch detectives develop another sense, another level of intellect or observation, and perhaps that's true.
Whatever the truth behind Monroe's extraordinary insights, the information she passed to police played an important role in finding Amy and her killer.
I think the biggest impact that her statements had on the investigation is that it stimulates conversation, it stimulates discussion, and that begets other information.
One day after Amy is found, police arrest Jeffrey Gorman and charge him with first-degree murder. At his trial, the terrible details of Amy's last night alive are revealed.
We will not know precisely what happened that night, but we believe that the assault started in the car.
After leaving the party, Gorman stops and forces himself on Amy. She resists, and he brutally assaults her.
He then takes a gun out and brings her to familiar ground. I believe Amy was taken up this road by force.
Hidden in the forest, under the cover of night, Gorman assaults and rapes Amy. Then, by a pine tree, he shoots her in the head. 2 days later, he returns to bury her next to the pond, covered by a cheap piece of plywood.
I often tell people that this is an unbelievable case. It was an unbelievable experience. It takes a lot out of you and pushes you against the wall. And I don't know how many times you can really handle that in a career, a case like this, one that you cannot afford to lose.
And there's no doubt in my mind that this man would kill again. This guy is serial sexual homicide.
In court, Gorman's own dark words finally seal his fate. Prosecutors present a recording of Gorman's mother admitting to police that her son had confessed to her that he killed Amy. A brutal killer is found guilty and sentenced to 60 years in prison for the murder of Amy St. Laurent.
Now that we have Jeffrey Russ Gorman behind bars, he will never be able to kill again. And this, to me, is sacred ground.
An innocent ride home takes a gruesome turn.
It was a crime of absolutely no logical reason.
A family's desperate search for their missing brother turns up nothing until a psychic 2,000 miles away tells them where to look.
This is where you have to go, and this is where you find your brother's vehicle.
She had a lot of details. She didn't get them from us. She didn't get them from the media.
But her visions make legal history.
There was total and complete silence during her testimony. Never heard anything like that before.
River Ridge, Louisiana, a small town on the banks of the Mississippi River, a suburb of New Orleans.
Pretty much people in River Ridge know each other pretty well. It's just sort of a small slice of American pie type of community. You wouldn't expect a person, particularly a hardworking carpenter, to suddenly disappear.
But in June of 1987, that's exactly what did happen. 27-year-old Andre Daigle vanished without a trace.
My mother called me Friday morning and told me that Andre was, missing and she hadn't heard from him. We're a close-knit family and very tight, and Andre wouldn't leave the pets without food or water, for one. And the other thing is, generally somebody would hear from him on a daily basis.
Andre's older brother, Chris, contacts the police immediately, but they're not convinced there's a problem and are slow to act.
The fact that he was a 27-year-old grown man, the police were like, what makes you think he's missing?
But the family believes something is very wrong and begin their own investigation, retracing his last steps.
Are you sure you haven't seen this guy?
The night he disappeared, he and Nick Shelley went to have dinner together, and then they went out to Mitchell's to shoot some pool.
Andre and his best friend Nick were playing pool for beers. Loser buys. Andre lost the first game, and at the bar, he met a young woman who called herself Thelma.
And they chit-chatted, just making small talk. When I talked to Nick about it, he tells me that he felt that she seemed to kind of hide her face, so he really didn't get a good look at her. It was a bit odd, but, that's just something you don't think about. I mean, these are the things you think about later, after they played a few games and had a few drinks. They were getting ready to leave, and that's when Thelma asked Andre for a ride home.
Andre agreed, and Nick Shelley went home separately in his own car. It's the last time he will ever see his best friend. 4 days pass, and nothing. 2,000 miles away in California, Andre's sister Elise is desperate to help. A friend suggests she visit a psychic.
When she came to see me, Elise told me she had a brother that was missing. I just asked her if she brought a picture of her brother and a map with her, and she said yes.
Rosemary Kerr lives in Escondido, California. She claims she has a special talent for finding missing people. She'll need it. She's never been to Louisiana and never met the Daigle family.
When I go into the picture, I don't need to look at it because the minute I put my fingers on it, I get vibrations. So my fingers, say it's like somebody reading Braille. I'm making my connection. Everybody else is out.
The connection Rosemary makes is immediate and profound.
As I'm touching the picture, I'm seeing all these things behind my eyes. I was telling Elise how I see her brother in his dark vehicle, and she denied this. She says, no, he drives the little white car. But I needed to go with the dark car because this is what Andre was showing me.
Elise is not aware that her brother has recently bought a new vehicle, a black Ford pickup. Now Rosemary focuses on the map of Louisiana.
And as I run my finger along the maps, my fingers tell me where to stop. It's a vibration in my fingers. And I stopped, and I opened my eyes, and I asked Elise, I says, Elise, do you know this place? Do you recognize this? Right in here. And she says, this is Slidell. She says, I know it. I says, if you know this place, you have to do it now, do it quick. This is where you have to go, and this is where you find your brother's vehicle. and find out where he is.
Slidell is 30 miles from the Daigle home in River Ridge. Chris and the family had just arrived back after a full day of searching. They were not prepared for what would happen next.
We were all in the kitchen with the maps laid out, trying to figure out, okay, where are we going to go tomorrow? What are we going to do? That's when the phone rang, and my mother got the call from Elise.
I just had a reading with the psychic here.
You know, she says, the lady says to go to Slidell. Well, man, when she said that, everybody in the room just got shook. You know, you could feel goosebumps, and it was like a spirit had walked through there and touched you on the shoulder just to let you know, this is real, you gotta go.
Within minutes, Chris and his family are racing towards Slidell, guided, they believe, by the spirit of their missing brother.
They went out in their vehicles to look for Andre. I told them to talk to Andre. And Elise said, why? I says, I want the open connection.
So we did, we knew he was frightened. We didn't know if he was alive or not. And we just wanted to reach out to him, and let him know that, his family was there. So.
Then, incredibly, there on the interstate, Chris spots Andre's truck ahead. The black pickup is heading towards Slidell, exactly where the psychic said it would be.
I actually kind of passed the truck up at first. I didn't even expect to see it, really, but drove up. Hey, was that it? Sure enough, that was it. Of course, we didn't recognize who was in the, driver's seat and who was in there driving it.
How could a psychic 2,000 miles away know where to find Andre's truck? But where is Andre, and who's at the wheel? In River Ridge, Louisiana, the mysterious disappearance of 27-year-old Andre Daigle has his family searching everywhere. 5 days pass without any success. Then, a California psychic 2,000 miles away points them in the right direction.
This is where you have to go, and this is where you find your brother's vehicle.
And sure enough, going down the interstate on our way to Slidell, and there was the truck. Of course, we didn't recognize who was in the driver's seat and who was in there driving it. So we decided at that point that we'd just kind of stick with them and see where they led us.
Chris tails the truck for nearly 30 minutes. Suddenly, the truck veers off the interstate and leads them down a deserted side road.
They turned the truck around, facing back towards us, and then they killed the motor and turned the lights off. Well, that was very spooky, because now we knew that they knew we were following them. They drove by real slow and just kind of checked us out and looked at us, and as they got by, they took off. We had just drove down that road not seconds before, and it was empty. Here we are 30 seconds later, we go down the same road, and who do we see? A police car.
As luck would have it, they ran across the only patrol car in the Pearl River area parked alongside the road that they were on.
We're all yelling, get that truck. Man, this is my brother. That's his truck. He's missing. You got to stop these guys. And that's when we got into a high-speed chase.
When police forced the truck to pull over, they believe they're investigating a stolen vehicle.
Step out of the truck, put your hands on top of your head.
I kind of walked up a little bit closer, and I asked him, I said, where's my brother? What'd you do with my brother? Where is he? Well, of course, they wouldn't answer.
But where is Andre? 2,000 miles away in California, psychic Rosemary Kerr believes she knows the answer.
When I felt myself holding my head and basically speaking louder and louder and louder because I could feel the pain, and I started yelling to Elise, my head is killing me. And as I felt that, I went into, I want to say, a different mode because I knew that I was looking for somebody that had already left the earth plane.
But Rosemary withholds this piece of information.
Elise did not ask if her brother was alive or dead. I am just the conductor of the words. I'm just a channel. But in order for it to be done the proper way, it has to go through the proper channels. It's for the authorities.
And the authorities were working fast. They identified the two men as 24-year-old Charles Gervais of New Orleans and 21-year-old Michael Phillips of Kenner. The two are brought in on stolen vehicle charges.
These two were not new to crime.
Captain James Gallagher of the Kenner Police Department is one of the officers in charge of the investigation.
The chief and his officers began interviewing Charles Gervais and Michael Phillips as to how they came in possession of the truck.
At first, Gervais isn't talking, but under questioning, his friend Michael Phillips eventually cracks. He describes a senseless, brutal murder, a murder committed, he says, by Gervais.
Once Charles realized that Mike was talking to the authorities, he demanded to speak to him, wanted to get the record straight. They talked about how they had Andre brought back to their apartment with Thelma. At some point, they retrieve a claw hammer out of Andre's truck. Then they take turns beating him with his own claw hammer.
The killer's motive was more extraordinary than even the police could have imagined.
The question was asked, why would you kill Andre? What was the purpose behind it? And Gervais tells me this story about hearing about a prostitution ring somewhere in Texas. And him and Mike decide, well, we don't want to work for a living. We'll just go to Texas and we'll kill whoever's running this operation and we'll take it over and the women will work for us. So they decide, well, if we're going to do this, we have to know before we get involved that we can actually take a life. So they come up with the scheme of sending Thelma out to bars and to look for someone, anyone, whoever she brings home, that person's going to die. And unfortunately, in this case, the person she brought home was Andre.
Andre Daigle was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, picked at random and killed as a dress rehearsal for a gangland hit, his body dumped in a swamp. Police recover the body. Both men are charged with first-degree murder and a warrant goes out for their accomplice, 21-year-old Thelma Horn of Kenner. Now police have to inform the family of their worst fear. Their youngest son, Andre, is dead.
You know, I never dreamed he would be dead. But it didn't work out that way. But at least we were able to find him and find the people who committed the crime.
But this case is far from over. Even with a confession, both men could still plead not guilty in court.
If the defendant doesn't take the stand and doesn't testify on his own behalf, you cannot use his statement against him.
In Louisiana, a not guilty plea can lead to the death penalty. Gervais sees the writing on the wall, admits his guilt, and is sentenced to life in prison. But Thelma Horn and Michael Phillips roll the dice. They plead not guilty and opt for a trial.
I think Michael was more concerned about consequences. He knew that we already pretty much had the whole story of what occurred, but he wanted to try and downplay his participation.
Gallagher needs as much evidence as possible. When he learns from Chris that it was a psychic's vision that led them to Andre's truck and exposed their killers, he reluctantly gives her a call.
You know, I deal with facts. I deal with things, you know, tangible things. And up until that point, I was still trying to figure out, you know, what the angle was. How did this happen?
Hello?
It was a phone call that would change a cop and make courtroom history.
There was total and complete silence during her testimony. Never heard anything like that before.
In Louisiana, the disappearance of a 27-year-old carpenter, Andre Daigle, has ended in murder. A California psychic has helped the Daigle family and police track down the killers. Now the police must work with a psychic to make sure the suspects are locked away forever.
Well, I learned that the way these people were actually caught was a tip from a psychic, a lady named Rosemarie Kerr, who lived in California.
When Captain Gallagher contacts Rosemarie, she recounts the details of her reading with Andre's sister.
Coming to you. So I come into Andre's vibration, getting more and more headaches coming in very, very strongly.
Well, she was talking about, I'm feeling pain to my head right now as I'm handling his photograph. I already knew from the investigation that Andre had been beaten with a hammer.
The autopsy revealed that Andre had been struck 10 times in the head.
She talks about where the body's at and where Andre's at.
I could see and also feel a freeway or a roadway that was to my right and high above me. I knew there was a railroad track to the other side. I knew there was marshes there. The number 7 kept coming in and coming in very strongly.
When Gallagher travels back to the location where Daigle's body was found, he's amazed at the psychic's accuracy.
We got off on exit number 7 right down the road to get here. As Rose told me during my interview with her, she described a long bridge. And what we have behind me here is Interstate 55, which runs for about 24 miles, elevated through the swamp. She indicated there'd be water all around Andre. Well, here we are, next to the swamp here. She had a lot of details that she didn't get them from us, she didn't get them from the media, and it just, I was amazed, but I became a believer after talking with her.
But could a psychic's visions hold up in a court of law? W.J. LeBlanc, a Louisiana district attorney, thinks Rosemarie's testimony is key.
From an evidentiary standpoint, there were some people in the office who were skittish about using a psychic during a trial. My position was that she was a fact witness, and based upon what she saw, someone else relayed that information to someone else, which led to the arrest of the defendants.
The brutal and bizarre murder of Andre Daigle makes front-page news, but what really grabs headlines is the psychic.
This case, in many ways, was sort of a bellwether case in establishing psychic involvement as an important forensic tool in conducting investigations in cases that were very difficult.
Richard Boyd was the court reporter at the Daigle trial.
In my 10 years of covering courts, it was the most amazing, astounding chain of circumstances that I ever ran across.
It would be the first time in U.S. legal history that a psychic would take the stand and describe how her visions helped to solve a murder. In a suburb of Louisiana, when a young carpenter disappears, a psychic in California tells the family exactly where to look. But what they find exposes a gruesome and bizarre murder. Determined to get a conviction, the state makes a daring move and puts a psychic on the witness stand.
I didn't feel any qualms, no pressures or anything. It felt like it was the normal thing to do.
February 2nd, 1988, 1 year after the murder, the state presents its case to a packed courtroom. W.J. LeBlanc, the DA, outlines for the jury the gruesome details of Andre Daigle's last hours. On the night of June 9th, 1987, Andre Daigle was playing pool with his best friend, Nick Shelley. At the bar, he meets a young woman, Thelma Horn. She later asks for a lift home. Inside the apartment, Charles Gervais and Michael Phillips ambush Andre, attacking him with a hammer taken from a toolbox in his truck. Their botched murder finally ended when the two men used a vacuum cord to strangle Andre to death. They wrapped his body in a curtain and hid him in the back of a couch. The following night, they dumped his body in a swampy marsh below the causeway. The evidence against the two men is compelling. Now the DA calls the psychic to the witness stand to help seal the prosecution case.
You could hear a pin drop in that courtroom. I mean, people were just enraptured by it, just totally focused on her.
Thank you. There's an old
Rosemarie Kerr tells the jury how her vision led the Daigles to Andre's missing truck.
You know, the emotion, it was just a chill went through the room.
At the close of the state's case, faced with the evidence, Michael Phillips changes his plea to guilty.
He was headed straight for the electric chair. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury was hanging on every word of every witness.
Without that information provided by Rose, which eventually led to the arrest, he would have been possibly another John Doe, unsolved homicide.
In a separate trial, the killer's accomplice Thelma Horn is found guilty of second-degree murder. With the help of the psychic's testimony, all three are serving life sentences.
I feel that this whole scenario wasn't in our hands, but in a higher power, and we all just did our job. And I have to give credit to the departments that work with people like me and realize if we can give them just one little piece of the puzzle, and that could help them, that's what we're about.
The Decoy family was devastated. To this day, is still devastated to a large extent by this senseless crime. A promising young man who was hardworking lost his life for absolutely no reason.
Andre was a great brother. You know, his life was cut so short. I don't know if he had time to even figure that out. Here's Rosemary, you know, a little lady living out there in California, you know, 2,000 miles away from us. Think that someone has that ability, you know, to make contact and into the spirit world like that and able to help, but she's connected.
In southern Louisiana, someone is killing the elderly. A psychic 4,000 miles away says she can see the killer.
I saw that he was wearing gloves and that he was very anxious, and he was looking for a way to get in.
They knew they were getting beaten, and they knew they were going to die. It was horrific, the manner in which he beat and killed human beings.
There was a lot of fear going around a community that a lot of people thought they might be the next victim.
Can a psychic's paranormal insights help police stop a psychopath before he kills again? Ascension Parish, a small slice of Cajun country deep in southern Louisiana. Within the parish, the small city of Gonzales, a peaceful community of friends and neighbors that prides itself on being the jambalaya capital of the world. It's a place where no one worries about keeping the doors locked at night. But in April of 1997, that peace was shattered.
So I was on duty at the time and heard a report over the radio of a possible homicide that occurred within the city of Gonzales.
Police are shocked to discover that Lillian Philippe, a 71-year-old widow, has been brutally murdered in her home. It's the first homicide victim in Gonzales in 11 years.
It's so beyond what you expect that when a situation like that happens, it just goes beyond your range of feelings there.
She was scheduled to go on a church bus trip to a casino about an hour and a half drive away. And she was very prompt all the time. If she said she was going to be at 8 o'clock, she was there at 7:45. She did not show up.
Gonzales Police Chief Bill Landry is one of the first to arrive at the crime scene.
She was on the floor and at the foot of her bed. It's obvious that a knife was used in the attack. There were noticeable stab wounds and some defensive wounds on her hands. There was very little trace evidence that was left at the scene.
The coroner on the case, Alfredo Suarez, is unsettled by the brutality of the killing.
She sustained multiple stab wounds to the neck area. Both jugular veins were severed by the deep stab wounds to that area. Furthermore, the larynx was partially severed, as well as the right lobe of the thyroid gland. In essence, she bled to death, and at the time, in that town of Gonzales, this was a horrifying death because the people in that town are not used to this kind of violent, brutal, bloody death.
Miss Leon's death caused a lot of concern because their quiet neighborhoods were now infiltrated with someone who had committed a murder. I mean, there was a lot of fear going around the community that a lot of people thought they might be the next victim.
But what the people of Gonzales don't know is even more terrifying. The death of Lillian Philippe is the third murder committed in the past 6 months along the airline highway. A highway that cuts through Ascension Parish, connecting Baton Rouge to New Orleans. Victor Rossi, the first victim, was beaten to death with a baseball bat. The second, Barbara Bourgeois, was stabbed to death.
Every time something like that happens, you lose a little bit of your innocence. And yes, it certainly we certainly lost our innocence during these events here.
3 bodies in 6 months. Each victim was elderly and attacked in their own home, but police are stuck.
But we were running into dead ends. It seemed like every suspect we may have come up with was eliminated.
Then Chief Landry receives a telephone call that will alter the course of the investigation.
I had received a call from a high school classmate of mine, Marcia.
Marcia lives in Honolulu, Hawaii. She is the niece of Lillian Philippe. She asks Chief Landry to consult with her friend Rose Kopp, a psychic.
It was suggested to him that I might be able to help.
Marcia had some concerns because they didn't know if the possibility if it was just a group of friends, the families that were friends together. They didn't know who was a target. She was concerned for the welfare of her family and just the welfare of Miss Lee, and to want to know if we were able to detect who had committed the crime.
Frustrated with the case, Chief Landry is willing to try anything, even a psychic.
I told him that I had worked on cases before and that I might be able to identify to some degree the perpetrator of the crime and might be able to offer some clues or hints into the investigation. I asked Chief Landry to send me a photograph of the victim and a small personal item of hers. And the photographs of people actually tell me things. I look into the eyes, and it's a matter that transcends physical reality. Once I see a person's photograph and touch an object that belongs to them, I'm able to connect better with the target.
But before the photo reaches Hawaii, the killer strikes again, this time a double homicide. Once again, the airline highway, just down the road from the home of Lillian Philippe. Seniors Sam and Luella Arcuri have been bludgeoned to death in their home. Then 5 days later, another killing. Joan Brock, 55, is beaten to death in her backyard. All signs point to a serial killer stalking the most helpless citizens of Ascension Parish. Although the body count is rising fast, police have very little information. The crime scene reveals nothing. No fingerprints, no DNA. In Honolulu, Rose Kopp is already on the case. Like a shaman or a medicine man, Rose enters a trance where she claims to be able to travel to the scene of the crime.
Shamanic journey is a trance that's induced by repetitive sound, slowly by just focusing on the sound of it. Your brain waves alter, and you feel very light. So I move out of body, flew over Diamond Head, over the Pacific Ocean. My intention was to go to Miss Lillian's house. I flew over California, Texas. I went to Louisiana, and I ended up standing in the carport. And I turned around and I looked over my right shoulder, and there was so much blood all over the place.
What Rose Kopp sees is shocking, but is it enough to find Lillian Philippe's killer? It's 1997, and the sleepy southern town of Gonzales, Louisiana has been rocked by the brutal murder of 71-year-old widow Lillian Philippe.
It just goes beyond your range of feeling.
Gonzales Police Chief Bill Landry has connected the killing to 5 others in the area.
I mean, there was a lot of fear going around a community that a lot of people thought they might be the next victim. And you had to really keep everybody happy and make sure that they saw patrol cars and saw officers around. And so it was the assurance that we had to give as a law enforcement community, had to give the public to know that they could still be safe in a community that was stricken with a serial murderer.
Police have few clues, but Chief Landry has made a connection of the most unusual kind. Rose Kopp, a psychic thousands of miles away in Hawaii, claims to be able to see the killer.
I saw that he was wearing gloves, and his hands were in fists, and so I got the kinesthetic impression that he was very anxious, and he was looking for a way to get in.
Gloves would explain the lack of fingerprints found at the crime scene.
I saw him as a Caucasian male, and about 5'9", and he had brown hair. He was very strong. So he went around to the side of the house, and I saw him move a wrought iron chair from the porch area and move that on top of the air conditioning vent and then stand up on it. And then it stopped. My vision stopped.
And the first thing she told me was that he placed a chair on top of an air-conditioned unit and actually climbed onto the roof of the home.
Chief Landry is stunned by what Rose tells him. There is no way she could have known about that chair.
Entrance was apparently gained through a vent through the roof of the house, and then ultimately entered the residence through attic stairs.
He was like a snake, like an anaconda, or those snakes that wrap around you. And he just seized on her and was stabbing her in the neck, in the throat. And there was so much blood all over the place. And I recall her trying to get him off of her, and she couldn't. He was too wiry and strong. She couldn't get him off of her. And I just saw all the blood all over the pillow and on the bed.
Somehow, Rose Kopp has seen details of the crime scene known only to police. With the pressure mounting, local authorities team up, creating a joint task force to oversee the investigation.
The task force was composed of St. John, the Sheriff's Department, St. James, Ascension Parish Sheriff's Department, and the City of Gonzales to try and collect all information.
District Attorney Charles Long monitors the task force.
The task force thought it wise to consult the FBI Child Abduction and Serial Killer Unit in Quantico, Virginia. After the FBI profiling was done, it was learned that all of the crimes, both in St. John, St. James, and Ascension and City of Gonzales, were probably done by a single killer.
Now, certain he's dealing with a serial killer, Chief Landry once again contacts Rose Kopp.
And he asked me if I would go back and see what his motives were, if I could give a more detailed description of him.
Rose takes another shamanic journey to the crime scene.
I flew over to Louisiana again, and I landed by Miss Lillian's house. And I turned around and I looked over my right shoulder, and the dark-colored sedan was there. I moved inside the car, and I noticed on the floor of the car were gambling slips, lots of papers and betting slips and things like that.
Amazingly, Rose's vision matches with what investigators believe is fueling the killing spree.
We thought that robbery was the motive. There was no other reason to consider why someone would prey upon Miss Philippi. We knew from other cases that there was some large amount of money missing, which we felt might be for a gambling habit.
Rose also says she sees someone new, the killer's girlfriend.
And I saw her in a place serving food. So I realized she was a waitress. So I looked to see her name tag. And I wasn't sure if it was Brandy or Cindy or Candy. And then I wanted to know where the restaurant was where she worked. So I looked out the window. I'm invisible all this time, Mom. And I looked out the window and I saw a fairly large building. And I smelled blood. And then suddenly I saw a severed cow's head. And it shocked me so badly that I came back immediately into my body. I was back in my living room. I don't even recall traveling back.
It's a bizarre psychic vision that transcends space and time, but it makes sense to Chief Landry.
Right off the top of my head, I knew exactly what she was talking about. It was a slaughterhouse. It was a regional slaughterhouse for cattle. And they had a big cow that stood up on top of a sign.
The slaughterhouse Rose can see was torn down years ago.
I mean, I got officers who didn't know that that sign existed at one time or another. I do remember it because as a kid, I remember the slaughterhouse. And when she said, "I see a cow on a sign," it was right off the top of my head. I knew exactly what she was talking about.
But it's the psychic's final vision that will blow the case wide open.
And then I saw an old woman's hand, and I knew it was an old woman's hand because it was veiny and the skin, the knuckles were wrinkly. And she wrote, "River Rat."
River Rat. What could it mean? And how is it connected to the case?
River rat is a term that we would use for people who live along the Mississippi River corridor. Or when you get into different sections of South Louisiana, the slang, the accent is a little different, and you're able to tell where people are from based on their accent.
Chief Landry may know what a river rat is, but what he doesn't know is what it means for the case. That is, until the killer strikes again.
There was a couple that was attacked outside our jurisdiction around the July 4th weekend. The suspect entered the home through a utility room window, armed himself with a weapon of opportunity inside the home, shot the female in the facial area, and shot the husband in the chest area.
The elderly couple barely survived the attack, but their description of their assailant is what shocks Chief Landry.
And they asked Miss Joyce if she had any description of the suspect, and she wrote on a piece of paper, "River Rat."
Gonzales police now know they are hunting for a river rat, but can they catch him before he strikes again?
There was something going on besides robbery. He woke them up in the middle of the night. They knew they were getting beaten, and they knew they were going to die.
A serial killer is on the loose in Ascension Parish, Louisiana. 6 elderly victims have been murdered, including 71-year-old Lillian Philippe. Though police believe robbery is the motive, they're disturbed by the viciousness of the attacks.
You've got your whole community in fear of who's next. When you go into somebody's house, that's you know, man's house is his castle. And when you're robbing the castle and killing the king and the queen, you got a problem. From the sheriff's department's point of view, from the district attorney's point of view, trying to prosecute somebody and bring them to justice and trying to calm the community. So I would say in my years of 15 years as a prosecutor, that was some of the worst. You know, we've had some other disputes, but nothing of this magnitude.
Gonzales Police Chief Bill Landry is working on the case alongside psychic Rose Kopp.
And then I saw an old woman's hand, and she wrote, "River Rat."
The latest victim has survived the killer's assault. She gives police a physical description of her attacker and also describes him as a river rat, slang for people who live along the Mississippi corridor. Now, using the FBI profile and the victim's description, police create a composite of the suspect and release it to the public. Again, Chief Landry is struck by the accuracy of the psychic's visions.
The description Rose had given me was very, very close in the physical features to the composite we ultimately got.
Only 5 days after the composite is released, there's a major break in the case.
There was someone who came forward to say, look, I know this guy. He's been spending a lot of money in a casino.
The witness identifies a resident of Gonzales, a man named Daniel Blank.
When you gamble, you have that little cord you put in a slot machine, or it tracks not only your earnings, but your losses also. It tells you how much you spent as compared to how much you've actually won.
And they gathered substantial information about, $80,000, $100,000 worth of gambling that he was doing at all of these casinos.
And you compare that with what you thought his salary would be for a self-employed mechanic, and it just didn't add up. Then you look at what associations Daniel may have had with each victim, and there was some relationship with auto parts, maybe a friend of the family. Everything just started really funneling right toward Daniel Blank.
Police go looking for Daniel Blank at his last known address.
Task force decided that, well, we're going to pick him up for questioning. He's got some, we checked on his earnings and his losses at the casino. He's going to have to show us some paperwork as to where these finances came from. We began looking for him and learned that he had ultimately just recently had moved to Onalaska, Texas. And so we contacted the authorities in Onalaska and sent our task force to Texas to further the investigation.
In Onalaska, Texas, investigators find Daniel Blank and question him about the murders.
It was a very long interview. I think it was approximately a 12-hour interview. And when he finally began to confess, of course, they went through each one of the crimes that were committed in detail, like a separate mini interview within the 12-hour interview.
And that's when I hit her with it. With what? With the thing, whatever it was, I had in my hand.
During his interrogation, Daniel Blank admits to all 6 murders, including that of Lillian Philippe. Police also pick up the mysterious Cindy from Rose's visions.
We discovered Cindy and learned that Cindy was actually Daniel Blank's girlfriend. And Cindy was the one Rose saw in the waitress outfit. Cindy worked at a little cafe. Daniel would frequent the cafe because there were video poker machines, gambling machines, and Daniel would, and I feel that's how Rose saw Cindy, but when she saw Cindy, Daniel would have been right inside gambling. So she actually saw them both there, but she only read Cindy's name, I think.
Police learn Cindy waitresses across the street from the site of the old slaughterhouse, just as Rose had envisioned. His girlfriend, Cindy Bellard, is released after making a deal to cooperate with prosecutors. In his confession, Blank reveals the brutal details of his murder of Lillian Philippe. After using the wrought iron chair to gain access to the home, Daniel Blank attacked the elderly widow with a trophy, then stabbed her to death with a kitchen knife.
Daniel Blank, in his confession, indicated he stole approximately $100 from Miss Lillian Philippe's house. My conclusion was there was something going on besides robbery in the manner in which he beat people. He woke them up in the middle of the night, first of all. If you look at it, they knew they were getting beaten and they knew they were going to die. And for some reason, I feel he wanted them to know that they were going to get beaten to death. Because other than that, you could have just simply went in, stole what you wanted and leave out, or there were more humane ways. If you're going to kill somebody, there are more humane ways than to beat them with a baseball bat, beat them with a trophy, slice them with a knife, beat them with a briar hook, chop them up, or whatever he was trying to do.
2 years after the crime, on September 2nd, 1999, a jury finds Daniel Blank guilty of the first-degree murder of Lillian Philippe. He is sentenced to death.
The main fact to me was that he was taken off the streets. he was not going to harm anyone else. So that was satisfaction.
Despite being over 4,000 miles away in Honolulu, Hawaii, somehow Rose Kopp was able to tell investigators in Gonzales, Louisiana, remarkable details that at the time only the killer could have known. He did use a chair to break into Lillian's home. His girlfriend was a waitress named Cindy, and his appearance matches Rose's physical description of the killer. He had a gambling problem, and he was a river rat. For Ascension Parish, the conviction of Daniel Blank returns a sense of peace. For the family of Lillian Philippe, it means justice. And for Rose Kopp, it means vindication for the psychic powers even she finds inexplicable.
I'm surprised, happy, exhilarated, satisfied. I love catching bad guys.
Not to say that Rose had everything signed, sealed, and delivered, but I think Rose's journeys did aid us to ultimately get the right guy.
In Malvern, Arkansas, the son of a local police investigator is abducted at knife point.
I thought that somebody that I had either arrested or busted was getting back at me in some way.
But a massive manhunt fails to find him.
The first 24 hours are crucial because the longer it goes, the consequences are always worse.
His parents, desperate to save their son, ask a psychic for help.
She would keep assuring me that he was alive.
Can the psychic help to find Tyson before it's too late?
He was going to kill Tyson.
Malvern, Arkansas, a town of 9,000, is home to the world's largest brick factory. It's also home to 17-year-old Tyson Eford. A typical teenager in his last year of high school, he's passionate about basketball and his pickup truck. To pay for his first set of wheels, he also works part-time on the night shift at the local food center. His shift on November 14th, 1991 begins like any other, until a man approaches Tyson and says that his beloved pickup has been hit in the parking lot. Telling the manager he'll be right back, Tyson follows the man out to investigate. He never returns. 30 minutes later, when the manager sees that Tyson's truck is still parked in the lot, he calls the police, and the police call Tyson's parents, Anita, a probation officer, and Henry Eford, a county sheriff.
We get to the parking lot, and his truck and his school books and stuff are still there. I knew something had happened because he thought more of that truck than he did anything in the world, you know.
The next morning, Malvern wakes up to one of the largest manhunts in Arkansas history.
All law enforcement in Hot Spring County, Malvern, the city, the county, the state, everybody was out looking for him.
Chuck Hefner is the lead investigator for the Arkansas State Police.
When you have a father, no matter where he works, involved, you have to keep some distance. We did not cut him out because it's his family. He wants to be involved, and he's a police officer.
But the investigation has few leads, except for the night manager's sketchy description of the man he saw with Tyson, and another witness who saw a scuffle in the parking lot. The Eford's only son has simply vanished.
They were hunting, they were looking, and I couldn't get no feedback. No feedback. No, it's just like somebody had come in and taken him off the earth.
2 days pass, and police fail to uncover a single new clue. His abduction is a complete mystery.
I think even the police even thought that there would be a ransom call in, but there wasn't.
I didn't feel like it would ever be a ransom. I felt like that it was revenge against me. In fact, deep down, I just knew that I would find him dead.
You'll always look for a child that's alive. That's what you're looking for. You hope you don't find the other, but that's not what you're looking for until there is some evidence to point you in that direction. And we didn't have anything to point us in that direction, so we were still looking for Tyson to be alive somewhere.
Just bring my son home or tell me where I can go get him anywhere, anything that you want.
But with no evidence, the odds of finding Tyson alive are fading by the hour.
At that point, the parent was more than police officer. I would have done anything, you know, to get my son back.
I love him. He is our only son.
Then, out of desperation, Anita Eford's brother makes a suggestion.
We love him. And I said, who's Carol Payton? He said, she's a psychic in Little Rock. He said, I've used her a couple of times. And I said, yes. I said, you do whatever you need to do. Get her down here.
And I said, yes, of course, I'll help. But I need some things from him in order to touch into him, to find out what's happened to him.
Carol Pate learned as a young girl she had a psychic gift for finding missing people. Since then, she's been involved in hundreds of investigations.
I use psychometry. That is touching a photograph of an individual or of a place, or handwriting and ink, touching that. And it's like tuning in a radio station. I see what they see, I feel what they feel, I think what they're thinking primarily.
3 days after Tyson's disappearance, Carol Pate drives from Little Rock to Malvern to meet the Efords.
She wanted something of his that was personal, that no one else had worn or touched or really anything. And I said, well, I've got a shoe. And she said, yes, I can focus in on him. Do you have a recent picture of him?
So they brought me a photograph and they brought me his shoe, and I sat down at the table and I quietly touched into both. And the first thing that I got was he was alive. Tyson's alive. That was wonderful.
But Carol also tells Anita she is visualizing the whole abduction, just as Tyson had experienced it.
I saw the whole thing immediately. I saw the men, I saw the man in camouflage, I saw the truck. It happened very quickly.
Now Carol asks Anita to take her to the crime scene.
I got in touch with Henry and I told him that I had Carol with me and we met him at the parking lot.
Henry Eford's conscience is torn. As a cop, he deals in hard evidence. As a father, he's willing to try anything.
I get Tyson coming out of the front of the store. At the parking lot, I got a better visual of the abductors. I got a better visual of the way they went out and how they grabbed him and how they forced him into the truck. There's a man that grabs him, the man that told him that the truck had been hit. He throws him inside the truck.
I call myself a halfway decent investigator. I'm getting information that nobody else had ever got. We didn't even know which direction he had went in, other than he'd went out the back of the parking lot.
They drive. They went that way, right out through the back, and to the left.
Will the psychic's visions turn out to be true and help Tyson's family find him before it's too late? In Malvern, Arkansas, a massive search has failed to find 17-year-old kidnap victim Tyson Eford. After 2 frustrating days of no leads, his parents ask psychic Carol Pate to help them find their son. At the crime scene, the parking lot of a local grocery store, Carol has a vision that Tyson is still alive. She claims she can even see where his abductors have taken him.
They went that way, and they turned left.
She said something to me about, I'll see a ridge. And I thought maybe she was talking about a mountain or a ridge or hill or something, and she said, no, it's a road. And I said, there's a ridge road.
Yes, that's it, Ridge Road. They took him down Ridge Road. They don't live far from Ridge Road. They took him to a house.
Tyson's father, a county sheriff, asks Carol to lead him to the location where she believes his son is being held.
And it was like I was following a trail of energy, and I started getting the details on the house. The house was small, white. It didn't look like a house. It looked different.
And she carried me straight down. We hit the end of the blacktop, Went into the gravel.
The energy stopped. And I couldn't tell which way to go.
And she told me, she said, I've lost it.
But it was like there was a wall there, and I couldn't go any farther. And we weren't supposed to go any farther.
Despite Carol's frustrating psychic dead end, Henry and Anita are convinced she holds the key to finding their boy.
This was the first information that we had gotten.
Nobody was coming up with anything. And then me talking with Carol, I was feeding that information to them.
So anything that he would give us, we would look into, because he knew the area well.
One promising lead is Carol's description of where Tyson is being held, a simple white house or a hunting trailer, popular in this rural area.
He had told us that she could see him in a building like a deer camp. That focused all of the investigation on buildings and deer camps and stuff. We searched deer camps in Clark County, Hot Spring County, Dallas County. In other words, what she was telling me, the whole investigation was in a roundabout way of swinging to what she had said because we had no other leads.
But even though Henry is a respected local cop, not everyone involved in the investigation is happy that the Efords have asked a psychic for help.
None of the police would work with me any way, shape, or form. I had to work directly with the Efords. That was the only way.
And we had some of the officers, one officer, elected officer, that said it was the work of the devil. Well, that's his belief. But I'm an investigator. I take anything that I can get a hold of to try to get to the bottom of the case.
The Efords and Carol Pate agree to keep in constant contact. Carol will try to connect psychically with Tyson every day and report what she sees or senses.
I checked on Tyson every single day. I was in contact with the parents every single day. I would give them information that I was seeing, and I knew he wasn't far from where I lost the energy trail.
I wanted to believe that he was still alive and that we would find him. She would keep assuring me that he was alive.
The psychic is sure Tyson is not dead, although some of her visions are deeply disturbing.
He was very frightened. I knew that he was being abused.
She talked about Russian roulette, where they hold a gun to your head and pull the trigger, and that they were doing that to Tyson, but she said he's still alive.
I felt the gun against my head, or Tyson's head. It was a bizarre feeling.
According to Carol's dark, disturbing visions, there are two men who abducted Tyson. One wears cowboy boots and a unique belt buckle, but he disappears from her psychic view. The other man is always there, always has a gun in his hand, and never takes his eyes off Tyson. But there are some visions that Carol does not dare tell the parents.
The man raped Tyson on several occasions. There was a lot of brutality. There was a lot of...
5 days have passed since Tyson disappeared without a trace. Apart from the psychic's visions, there are still no new clues.
I was just wore completely out. I was done to the point that I couldn't think straight. I was to the point that I had to have closure somewhere because I figured Tyson was dead.
He kept saying, you know, you got to, be prepared for this. You got to be prepared. And I said, I'm not going to be prepared for it. He's still alive. And I said, we got to find him.
And then, suddenly, the psychic's visions turned even darker.
There was a total shift, and I knew that Tyson had maybe 24 hours, that this man was going to do something.
I remember her calling and saying that, we've got to find him because...
She said something about a grave.
In Carol's vision, Tyson is dragged from the house, taken to a field, shown 3 graves, and forced to kneel down in one of them. Then the man points a gun at his head.
It was very strong, very powerful, and I was very afraid for him.
That night, Carol holds a psychic vigil. A powerful psychic tool she believes could stop Tyson Eford from being killed.
I recognize that my psychic abilities are gifts through God, and I ask and I pray for help, and I do it in the name of Jesus Christ, and it has never failed me, ever. Lord God, we ask at this time for the safe return of Tyson Eford, that there be no harm done to him, no harm to anyone involved. And we ask this now in the name of our Lord and Master, Jesus Christ.
The same night, around 2 a.m., Malvern police get an unexpected phone call. The Efords' prayers are answered.
I said, my name's Tyson Eford. I've been released.
Against all odds, Tyson Eford has been let go, released on a lonely stretch of highway just a mile from his house.
And he reached over to me and said, can we be friends? Of course, I shook his hand to get out of the situation I was in. And I ran as fast as I could to the nearest house.
I didn't even stop in the road. I just went straight through the yard and went right up to the porch.
And then when I saw Tyson, I got out of the car. And so he grabbed Tyson, and I grabbed him, and of course I was crying and all upset, and I had my baby back.
Tyson's parents take him directly to the hospital. On the way, he talks about his abduction, a story that is both horrifying and chillingly familiar.
After I get Tyson in the unit, he and Nita was in the back seat. And he went and told me, he said, Daddy, he raped me.
Tyson's story is so horrific. His parents are grateful that he's alive to tell it. But it's also so bizarre, the police are finding it hard to believe. A massive manhunt involving the FBI, state and local police, and hundreds of volunteers can't find 17-year-old Tyson Eford, but 6 days after his abduction, he's suddenly released in the middle of the night near his house.
This highway right here is Highway 9. This is where I was dropped off when I was released, and I ran to the nearest house down this road right here.
Like the family, the police are relieved and amazed Tyson is still alive. But the story he tells is so horrifying, it's hard for the police to accept.
Myself and an FBI agent interviewed him for about 5 hours. I needed more information to corroborate what he was telling us.
They said, there's no way he could have gone through what he went through and survived.
The police may be skeptical about Tyson's dark tale, but remarkably, it matches exactly with Carol Pate's psychic visions.
There was questions that I did ask him. I said, was there any guns? And he said they stuck it up to my head. They put a bullet in it, and they kept pulling the trigger. I said, Henry, that's what Carol told us about the Russian roulette.
I didn't know how she would know that. Only I would know that because I was the only one going through it.
What Tyson went through, I experienced to a lesser degree, but nevertheless I experienced it physically. I could feel it physically. That's why I would disconnect. It was extremely painful.
And then I asked him, I said, did one of them wear cowboy boots? And he said, yeah, Kevin Scott wore boots. And from the way I understood, she was seeing this through Tyson's eyes.
I saw the men, I saw the man in camouflage, I saw the belt buckle. But Tyson, I think being the son of police officers, took notice of everything around him.
To confirm Tyson's story and bring the kidnappers to justice, the police need to find the men fast. Tyson gives them a lead, a name he saw on a letter in the house where he was held. Within hours, 35-year-old Carl Meany is arrested. The psychic predicted that Carl Meany's house where Tyson was held was close to Ridge Road. In fact, it was a mere 500 yards.
It amazes me how close she was, how close she got to the house where I was.
Carl Meany's address confirms even more of Carol's visions. His house is small, white, and located in the country. And the route that Carol saw the kidnappers take leads right to the door.
There's two ways to go. But how did she know which road I was on? Why didn't she go somewhere in the city? It's amazing. This is the crossroads off of Ridge Road, where Carol Pate lost the scent right here. She didn't know which way to go, either right that way or left that way. But they went left. If they would have went right, they would have went right to the house.
Meany's address confirms Carol's psychic vision and how close she was to actually finding Tyson. Was she also right about him being in mortal danger? And how close did she come to saving his life? On the 5th day of his abduction, Tyson remembers Meany tying him up and then leaving to go to town. He returns, edgy and upset, and tells Tyson,
Your pictures everywhere, all over the stores, all over the store I went to. Obviously, there's a lot of people looking for you. And I think it really freaked him out where he's going to have to do something today.
He was going to kill Tyson. That was my feeling.
Later that night, he took me out, and he had a gun, a pistol, on him. Walked across the pasture. I seen 3 holes.
I told the parents about the man taking him out and showing him the 3 graves.
I never prayed much before, and I just prayed to the Lord that he would not kill me.
When I realized that Tyson was going to die that night, I had to do something. I had to.
On the night of the 5th day of Tyson's abduction, Carol Pate holds her psychic prayer vigil.
Do I have your agreement for the safe return of Tyson Eford?
I agree. I agree.
I said, please don't do this to me. Please don't kill me. He says, I've got to kill you.
Be released?
I said, I promise I will not tell anybody where I've been. Just please let me go.
In the name of our Lord and Master, Jesus Christ.
And then I guess something keyed, his conscience keyed into him, said, I'll let you go. We're on the road right in front of Carl Meany's house, where that night before he let me go, he took me across to a pasture out there where 3 holes were dug. I think he had every intentions to kill me, and I think something triggered in him where the Lord spoke to him and told him not to do this.
What did make Carl Meany decide to spare Tyson and let him go? Whatever the truth, the Eford family believes it was the psychic's prayer circle.
And by Carol having the prayer circle, that's talking to God. I believe that that's what got him back to us safe.
Yes, the good Lord was looking over. Because those people were crazy enough to kill him.
I ask and I pray for help, and I do it in the name of Jesus Christ, and it has never failed me.
Tyson and his parents are amazed at the uncanny accuracy of Carol's psychic visions, but the police remain skeptical of Tyson's story until they get another bizarre surprise. The second kidnapper, Kevin Scott, turns himself in.
And then Scott, whenever he turned state evidence, it backed everything Tyson said.
It was a bizarre setup by Carl Meany to use not only Tyson, but to use his own friend as part of his ploy.
Finally, Tyson's story of his abduction is fully confirmed. It was Scott who grabbed him at knife point in the parking lot while Meany drove. He was taken to a small white house in the country where the men played Russian roulette. Meany had fooled Scott, telling him that Tyson was vandalizing his property and needed a scare. But after Scott left, the real reason Meany had abducted Tyson became clear.
They're all playing tricks on Tyson, and Meany's playing tricks on everybody else. Very, very bizarre man, Carl Meany.
With the testimony of Tyson Eford and Kevin Scott, Carl Meany receives 3 life sentences for the brutal kidnap and will spend the rest of his days in prison. Today, Tyson still lives in Malvern. He's married and drives a forklift for a living. He will never forget those 6 horrific days here on Ridge Road, nor a psychic's role in helping his family find him.
I don't know much about psychics, but I know that she gave my parents hope that I was still alive.
Tyson's alive. He's alive.
He was our only son, and she was going to do whatever she could to help us and to assure me that he was still alive.
She had been telling us the truth. She is somebody we'll never forget.